The name of this movie is Deeds. Now I want to see if we're recording. The name of this movie is Deeds, and we are recording. Okay. The name of this movie is Deeds. My name is David Selders. David Selders Sr., David V. Selders Sr. It is, as I speak, it is January the 20th, 1996, and I am 74 and a half years old. And my kids have often asked me to write down some stories or record some stories. So I'm going to tell you some stories here about my life that are of interest to me. There's no order to it, and so on. But the name of the movie is Deeds. Dave's Deeds. The first story is going to be Wormy's Drugstore, 1933. Wormy's Drugstore. In 1933, I was 12 years old, and I had the good fortune to grow up around Valentine Road and Roanoke Park, and we were really heavy into tennis. We're kids, we had no supervisors, no teachers, no coaches, none of that crap. We were just into it on our own, and we worked at it very hard, and we were very serious about it. We'd get up at 5 in the mornings and make the courts, and making the courts involved dragging them all. They were made out of grit. They weren't hard surface like the ones you have today. They're made out of grit, and you dragged a great big carpet that was nailed to a big long 2x4 about 12 feet wide. You walked back and forth over the grit to smooth that out. Then you had hoses with sprinklers, and you sprinkled and sprinkled. By the way, these are city parks, and there's a tool shed there by the city, and they're supposed to be city workers. But those guys hardly ever showed up, or when they did show up, they were lazy, and none of them knew anything about tennis. And we were immaculately careful about our court markings and so on, the care of the court. So we got the key from the hired worker and had a copy, and we could always get into the tool shed and we'd get these things out. Drag the courts, get the hoses, sprinkle them down, so just damp enough, just right. Then we would drag them again after they were sprinkled. Then we would push a big, huge, heavy roller back and forth, back and forth. This process easily took 45 minutes to an hour. But when we finished, then we would have two guys hold nails down at the ends of the lines with a string attached, and we would roll a lime, a round cylinder like this marker that spilled out the lime as you went down the lines, and the courts were one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. We loved them. To a tennis player, this was heaven. As little kids like that, I started when I was 5 because Gene and Lloyd, my older brothers, were into it, and the center of the net came right below my eyes when I started. There were no children's rackets. I had to use a full-size racket and could hardly hold my hands around it. But we loved it. We loved tennis. And we'd go down there, as I say, and make these courts, mark them, make them wonderful, and then we'd play on them. play and play and play, singles and doubles. We managed our own play. We were fair to each other and honest to each other until the older groups came along. Then they'd push us around. But among ourselves, we were very well organized, no coaches, no administrators, no nothing. And we were serious about the game. It was a real matter of honor to call the line shots properly, no cheating, and if you were beat, you were beat. If you won, so on. It was a wonderful, wonderful world. But about Wormy's drugstore. In this environment in the summertime in Kansas City in the 30s, it was really hot. It was just before the Dust Bowls and the terrible, terrible summers. And we would have high humidity, and we would have temperatures that would get up 105, 108, and it was really hot. Didn't stop us at all. We'd do the same routine down at 5, make the courts, so on. Play until noon. Then we would drag ourselves, we'd walk, drag ourselves up to 39th and Genesee to Wormy's drugstore called the Mellier Place Pharmacy, where Wormy did it all. He was the pharmacist putting out prescriptions. He was the retail clerk selling boxes of chocolates or whatever you want to buy, cigarettes, everything. And he had a regular soda fountain, which in those days was not an oddity at all. A great soda fountain, marble top soda fountain with spools, about 5 or 6 stools, and a bar to put your feet on. And you sit there and watch Wormy make the greatest chocolate malted milks in the world. He'd have 8 or 10 mixers over there, and as many as of you ordered, he'd put the stuff in these big tins, these great big tins, slap them on the mixers, and they were grinding away while he's making the bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwiches. And those malts were super thick. They were drinkable, but they were extra good and thick and rich. Had a little cinnamon in them. Life was good. Wormy's, BLTs, and chocolate malts made the greatest meal I've ever eaten in my life. I would trade any other meal in the world right now for one of Wormy's BLTs and chocolate malts. Now the kicker of this story is, guys, test, 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 test. Are we recording? Are we recording? Are we recording down there? Yep, yep, yep. Okay. Hey guys, the kicker of this story is that the lunch cost 40 cents. 25 cents for that marvelous BLT and 15 cents for the fantastic chocolate malt. 40 cents in 1933. And actually that's quite a bit of money in those days for us kids to get hold of. But it was the greatest bargain and the greatest meal I've ever had in the world. Wormy's Drugstore. Pop stand. Pop stand, pop stand, pop stand. The name of this story is Pop Stand, 1931. In 1931, I was 10 years old and living on Valentine Road, that really wonderful spot. And Valentine Road, where our house, our little bungalow was, had a big S-turn in it. And it was surrounded by mansions, by pretty important looking places. And the old Model A's and Model T's, the car traffic had to slow down to go around this S-turn. And in the summer of 1931, it was starting a series of very, very hot years. And the temperatures were very high and the humidity was high. And it was really pretty tough. Very few people had air conditioning. Very little air conditioning had even been invented by that time, actually. And because I was alone a lot as a kid, my father was working very hard in his business, and my mother was very busy in her church. She was also sick a lot. So Mom and Dad let me have the run of things, of my life, and I didn't abuse it much. And it was really fairly safe in the streets and the parks in those days. So Mother and Dad, as they did frequently, would take a little vacation in the heat of the summer to Colorado. They'd go to a place called Green Mountain Falls, very quaint little tiny village down in the bottom of a valley in the mountains with little log cabins around that you could rent. And it was cool. That's where people would hurry to from Kansas City that could get away to get cool. And I was left, as I recall, alone. Maybe Lloyd was around, but he wasn't paying attention to me if he was. And across the street lived Jack and Charles Newman. And their daddy owned the Castle Ice Cream Company, which was a great boon for us. A little side story about that. The Castle Ice Cream Company was down where the old Carnegie Awning Company was, down around Penn Valley and it'd be like Broadway and 29th, something like that. And in the plant, the ammonia pipes were running in the open room ceilings where the ice cream was inventoried to make it cold. And frequently the ammonia pipes would break and ammonia would get out into the room, and so the top inch or two of these big 5-gallon containers of ice cream, wonderful flavors, so on, would be tainted with ammonia. So Mr. Newman would bring that home to his home at Valentine Road, right across the street from us, and he very frequently gave us large quantities of ice cream that was ammonia tainted on the top. You could just scrape off that top inch or two and you had terrific ice cream. It was great. Anyway, this particular summer, 1931, Charlie and Jack Newman and I were a little bored, and we saw around town as we rode our bikes or roller skated around, we saw little kids with lemonade stands selling lemonade for a penny a cup, and or some of them had soda pop and so on. We decided we had to have a pop stand. So we got permission from his folks to use a little lot that was just south of their driveway that went back to their carriage house, so it wasn't near the front of their home. To use that little parcel of a lot that was directly across the street from our house, however, to build a pop stand. And boy, we got busy and we built a pop stand. Check, check, check. We found some old 2x4s and some wood over there in their carriage house, and we built a tabletop kind of a thing with 4 legs, and then we had some risers going up with a little covering over the top, and we got a hold of some old canvas awnings or something and put on there for shade. And we get out these big old-fashioned wash tubs, metal wash tubs that they used in those days to do their laundry, and we used those to put the ice in, the soda pop. In those days, kids could get the Coca-Cola company, who was by far the biggest bottler in the city. There was no Pepsi-Cola. Get the truck driver from the Coca-Cola company to come buy your pop stand and deliver the soda pop. And incidentally, we did such a fantastic job, he ended up delivering to us every day. We'd sell out a big supply every day. And he said we had the biggest selling pop stand in Kansas City as far as he knew. At any rate, our pop stand looked fair, but it didn't look great, and so I had a big idea. And I got the Charlie and Jack, and we went across with some screwdrivers and pliers, and we unscrewed a door, a very fine wooden paneled door out of our home. I think it was the door to the library, I forget. But we unscrewed that sucker from the door sill, and we carried it across, and I nailed it to the front of the pop stand to give it some class. Also, we had some wooden folding chairs in our basement like you use in a church meeting place, where they fold up flat and stack against a wall. But you open them up, you got a wooden chair. I had about 8 of those wooden chairs in our basement, and we brought those out and we stacked them very precariously looking, but we stacked them carefully, 4 high, and somehow we'd get up there on top and sit in those chairs and holler at the traffic coming from the north and the south. I remember that Lloyd had been a cheerleader over Westport High School, and he had a blue megaphone about this long, and we'd holler with this blue megaphone at the people, you know, ice cream and soda pop and so on. And we really knocked them dead sitting up there on top of those crazy stacks of chairs on both sides of our pop stand. We stopped traffic going both ways, and we sold an enormous amount of soda pop and quite a bit of ice cream that we got free from Castle Ice Cream Company. So we really did very, very well with this thing. That is, until my folks came home. And frankly, it wasn't so good, particularly with that library door. So we had to knock down our pop stand, and that was the end of that venture. But it was one moneymaker, I got to tell you. It was a very successful entrepreneurial venture, except for that fine door that I brought from the house. That's the end. That's the end of the pop stand story. Test. We're running okay. All right, now are we in the picture? Looks to me like we're in the picture. Okay, the name of this is Beta Draperies. Beta Draperies. 1938. I sort of hate to tell you guys this, but I was really in a big hurry to go to college and get through college. We had a family business. My brothers were all grown up and gone. And it was 1938 when I graduated from Westport High School in June, before I turned 16. I was 15 years old and I knew everything in the world. I just can't tell you how smart I was. And And I was in the middle of a passionate love affair. I guess it was my first big love affair with a lovely girl named Peg Weaverling. Lived at 3723 Locust Street, just north of the Science School, where Diane ended up going and becoming chairman of their board this year, 1995-96. But the day I got out of Westport High School, graduated, 15 years old, I immediately started the next week in college at the University of Kansas City in the summer school. I wanted to go straight through 12 months a year and graduate in 3 years. I just couldn't wait. And at that time I wanted to go into the family business, and I didn't really see any sense in all this wasted time going to school. Peg Weaverling's parents were big shots from Nebraska. They had he had been in the Men's Secret Honor Society, tapped for that, and she was a big Pi Phi, and he was a big Sigma Nu, I think it was. Lloyd is a big Beta Theta Pi down at Kansas State, Manhattan, Kansas, and because of that, my folks let me go to Nebraska. I have no idea why they did that, exceeded to my wish, except that I'm sure they were very tired after 5 children and mother's illnesses and so on to get me out of the barn. But I did my summer school at KCU, completed my biology and some other stuff, got a few 6 or 9 hours of credit, and took off for Lincoln, Nebraska, where I pledged Beta Theta Pi, and incidentally never made my grades. The first semester I had a 69.9, and you had to have 70, so the Betas gave me one more chance, and at the end of the second semester I had a 69.9 again and didn't make it, so home I went. That was the end of my out-of-town educational career. But while I was there, I had this passionate love affair with Peg Weaverling, and was a pledge in the Beta House and a rascal. Now, I had with me another rascal from Kansas City named Bill Schofstall, Schofstall, a nice kid, a freckle-faced, funny kid. He was sort of a puck, and the two of us were pretty much troublemakers, not serious, but just troublemakers, just goof-offs. And we had in the Beta House, well, first I'll describe the Beta House. It was like an English library on the first floor. It was absolutely a knockout, dynamite. On the second and third floor, it was like a prison. It was all concrete. When we cleaned the halls as pledges, we just turned the hoses on. It was a barren son of a gun upstairs. Maybe they're all like that, but I thought it was terrible. And we had a pledge up there, a legacy guy out of Omaha named Lee Davis. And Lee was really a big sissy and a pansy, and nobody liked him. But his mother liked him. And his mother had a lot of money, and Lee had a private room. Most of the pledges had double rooms, but Lee had to have a private room. His room was decorated to the teeth by his mother. And of course, this offended all of us and caused a lot of teasing. Well, on one weekend, Bill Schofstall and I found ourselves at the Beta House pretty much alone. Everybody else had gone somewhere, because a lot of them were town people or Omaha people. We were freaks coming out of Kansas City. And we were there alone, and we were wandering around on the third floor where we lived, and here's Lee's room. By George, it's got brand new, elegant, expensive draperies up at this one window in this cell. And we couldn't believe it. We just couldn't believe it. Obviously, his mother had come down there and put up these fantastic draperies. Believe me, nobody had draperies. So the long and short of it is that Bill and I found some burlap sacks and set them on fire and burned them fairly good, but just enough so they'd hold together but look scorched and everything, and you couldn't tell they were burlap. We took down his fancy new draperies and hid them away downstairs near the house mother's place. And we somehow made these burnt burlap sacks hang from the drapery rods like they were the burned up draperies. And of course, this caused a terrible commotion Sunday night when Lee, I said his name was Lee Taylor, Lee Davis was Lee Taylor, Taylor, Lee Taylor. And when Lee Taylor came home from Omaha, there was a real fracas. But we made heroes out of ourselves because we had a little water on the floor up there. It was all concrete. We got a little water in the hall and in his room on the floor. And we made heroes out of ourselves by telling him how we had saved the rest of his fancy equipment from the fire. It was a terribly, terribly dangerous, heroic act that we had performed. And the only problem is that the members of Beta Theta Pi didn't think this was very damn funny, and neither did Lee, and neither did his mother. But Bill and I did, and the rest of the pledges also thought it was pretty funny. That's the story of the Beta draperies in 1938. The name of this block is High School Football Star. I got out of Westport Junior High School, where I'd gone to the 7th and freshman year. We didn't have an 8th grade. That's one reason why I got out of high school when I was 15. And when I started to Westport High School in the fall of 1936, the frost was on the pumpkin and the air was great, and boy, we had all kinds of sandlot football down around Roanoke Park and Carnes Boulevard and in our front yards. We didn't have any uniforms like the kids do today. We just played in our sneakers and our blue jeans and toughed it out. The guys got their heads cut open and their arms broken and everything else, but we didn't have any uniforms. We played a lot of football, and I was a great quarterback and a great passer and a great broken field runner. So when I started at Westport High School in 1936, I was ready for bear. And I inquired about football tryouts, and they said it'll be posted on the bulletin board. So I watched the bulletin board like a hawk, and sure enough, one Friday morning, pretty early, second, third week of school, September, there's a notice that everybody wanted to try out for football should go down and fall out on the field. Now, we didn't have a field of our own at Westport High School. We didn't have any grandstand. There was just no field. We played at Gillum Park. That's where all of Westport's football practice occurred, and the games were played at other people's schools because all the other high schools had stadia, but we didn't. It was a poor school. So the notice said, fall out on the grinder down there at the park, Gillum Park. Well, I'm telling you, I fell out. I was there. So were about 80 or 90 other guys. Now the coach was named Pee-wee Barrett, French. Barrett, Pee-wee Barrett. Now Pee-wee Barrett had been some kind of a famous college backfield runner. And I don't know the extent of his career, but he was pretty famous nationally. But Pee-wee Barrett was about 5 feet 2 inches tall. And he wore cleats. He always wore his uniform, the striped shirt and the pantaloons and cleats that were about 2 inches long to add to his height, and he wore a black cap. He was in a whistle hanging from a leather strand around his neck. He was a dandy-looking coach, except he was 5'2". Now, Pee-wee Barrett comes trotting down the hill to Gillum Park from the school in this outfit I just described, and he trots across Gillum Road when the traffic broke. And he comes over here on the grinder where these 80 guys were all turned out to try out for football. And he blew his whistle. It was a nice, crisp fall day. It was a very exciting moment. And everybody was up high. We were all hyped up. He blew his whistle and get our attention, and we were all frolicking around. In fact, there wasn't even a football around. We're just messing around. And he said, all right, you fellas, you all out there for football? Yes, okay. Let's line up in a row, make a long row here, and put the tall men down at this end and the short men at that end. And so it took 2 or 3 minutes for everybody to find out where they belonged and so on. The tall guys are down there and the short guys are over here. And Pee-wee Barrett, 5'2", standing in his 2-inch cleats, football cleats, walked to the center of that line and blew his whistle, said, all right, men, all you fellows from here down, go on home. And that was the end of my high school football career. Except that when I walked home, it was 3.5 miles home to Valentine Road. As I walked home, I kicked every stick and every piece of gravel or ever Coke bottle or tin can I could find all the way home. I was so goddamn mad. That's the end of my high school football career. How lucky can you get? Well, the name of this is Colville. Colville. I just can't believe it. That's right. I gotta look. The name of this is Colville. Colville. This is a little bit of a complicated story because it's sort of a couple of stories together. My dad, George Washington Selders, forget it. Forget it. Okay. The name of the story is Coal Bill. Coal Bill. Coal Bill. Just throw that thing isn't high enough. This is a little bit of a complicated story about the coal bill. I'll start by telling you that back in those days, in the 20s and the 30s, my father had purchased two little lots at 4201, 4203 Roanoke Road. And he had constructed on those, he had designed and constructed two little twin bungalows, two-bedroom bungalows that were very nice, tidy little bungalows with underground parking for one car and a very tight rock driveway going down for one car. And he used these homes for his children as they got married. I believe that Lena and Willard, yeah, I know they did. Lena and Willard, Lewis and Millard had married earlier and were not in these homes, I don't think. Lena and Willard were, and Jean and Monica were, when they first got married. This was their starting point. And then Lloyd and Sarah were in the North House, 4201. And so when Dodie and I got married, we got the house at 4203. The only difference was that these other people rented from him. And when I came along the last one, he decided he would sell the houses. So Lloyd bought his house and I bought mine from our father on terms with nothing down. And I had fortunately made a good bit of money in my restaurant at the University of Kansas City called the Red Roost, which was the old Kangaroo, it was the school hangout. And I had had some good fortune there entrepreneurially, and I had enough money to completely furnish our little bungalow there. And we moved in just before we were married, September of 1941. And the beginning of this story about the coal bill is that that Willard Camberg, my husband and my sister Lena Lee Camberg, Lena Lee Selders Camberg, was an engineer kind of a guy. He was very, 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 very competent in all kinds of engineering things. And these homes had been built with gas furnaces, automatic gas furnaces, which are pretty neat, pretty simple. But Willard, being an engineer, wanted to save some money on the heating bill, and he had caused two coal stokers to be installed in each of the houses. Now, the principle of this thing was a box outside of the furnace into which you put crumpled coal. And there was an auger that ran from the bottom of this box, and it augered this ground coal into the furnace and to where it was fed to the fire. And theoretically, these things were supposed to be terrific because coal was pretty cheap, and it was cheaper than gas. And with the automatic auger and everything, you're supposed to be fairly well free of work. Well, the truth of the matter was that they never worked. Now, what they would do is they would feed coal faster than it could burn inside the furnace, and then it would load the inside of the furnace with coal because the machine didn't know enough to stop augering coal in there. So it would put the fire out and load coal, a box full of coal, inside the furnace. So our experience, Lloyd, my experience was that very frequently, in our very first winter of marriage, our home would be ice cold when we came home, or it would go out in the night. A number of mornings I woke up and the water in the toilet bowl was frozen. It was maddening, really maddening. And ultimately, Dodie and I were at a formal one night, and when we came home, the water was frozen in the toilet bowl. It was just absolutely like 30 degrees inside the house. And I braced my back, and I'm in my tuxedo. Instead of crawling, see, you have to crawl inside the furnace up to your waist by hand to pull all this coal out. It's a terrible job. I'm in my tuxedo, and the house is frozen. And so I proceed to literally kick the mechanical box and auger off of its concrete pedestal and break it, and we converted to gas. Now, that's one part of the story. But the earlier part of the story is that we were very close to the edge financially, very close. And I was working at the mill, and we had one car, so I would walk from our home to Westport Road and over to Broadway and get on the bus and ride down to the finance building at 1009 Baltimore, where the offices of Spear Mills were located, up on the 7th floor. We had the 7th floor there. And this was while I was waiting to get my orders, or learning how to fly and waiting to get my orders to go into the service, because we were married September 18th, 1941, and the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. That's another story I'll tell you. So the war started 3 months after we got married, although I didn't actually go into service for like a year and a half, waiting on orders. But early, right after we got married in September, October, I had gone to a coal yard on Westport Road, and I had purchased a ton of coal. Now, this coal cost about $8. And they had delivered that and put it down the coal chute into the coal bin in my house, there 4203 Roanoke. And this was the very granulated coal that was causing us all the trouble in the bin. And the embarrassing problem was that as the bill came in, they charged the bill and sent it to me through the mail. I couldn't pay it. I couldn't pay the $8 coal bill. I was very humiliated by this. So as I got up and walked to the bus about 6:30 on these cold mornings down Westport Road, I would pass the little office of the coal yard where there's a naked light bulb hanging down, and a woman accountant was sitting there behind a counter. And I was so embarrassed and so humiliated at not being able to pay this bill promptly that I would walk through the snow and the cold 3 blocks around to avoid the 1-block walk past their office. It was my first experience at being, quote, poor, financially unable to meet my obligations, which I felt very sincerely about. Well, after several weeks of this, walking 3 blocks out of my way so that I wouldn't go past their window at 6:30 in the morning, I had gotten a paycheck, and I was able to pay the $8 bill. So on this particular morning, man, I didn't go 3 blocks out of the way. I strode right straight to their office building about 6:45. I had to catch my bus at 7 over on Broadway. And I waltzed in there, and with great pomp and circumstance told them I believe that I've got a bill here that I owe you, $8 for some coal. My name is David Selders, 4203 Roanoke Road. The woman hardly grunted. She pushed around some papers and brought out an accounting, a ledger sheet. Everything was done by hand in those days. There were no computers. And she said, yeah, that's right, $8 and so much tax. And with a flourish, I wrote out the check and handed it to her, and I thought that they were going to give me a cake or ring a bell or call a meeting or something because they were so proud of me. And she grunted and took the check and went back and sat down and ignored me. And I I turned around and walked out into the cold and walked onto the bus. I don't know what to say about that. It was a terrible feeling, both ways. It was terrible not being able to pay the bill promptly, and it was just awful that they didn't have a band or a parade to celebrate my integrity and my honesty in getting in there. But at least I could stop walking 3 blocks through that bitter cold out of my way to avoid walking past this babe's 1 electric light bulb office front. And that's the end of my coal bill story. The name of this story is Honeymoon and Pay Cut. Honeymoon and Pay Cut. Dodie and I were married at the Country Club Christian Church on September 18th, 1941. This was her 18th birthday. I really cheated her on that one. And I was 20 years old. And we were going to the Elms Hotel in Excelsior Springs that night for our honeymoon. I forgot exactly how it worked, but in those days it used to be a big deal for the guys to catch the bride and groom and separate them that evening for a while and then finally turn them loose. But we had taken great pains to hire a car in the Congress garage across from the Ambassador Hotel. George, Diane, and Dave, you'll remember this from being across from the Colony restaurant, where we parked many times. We parked in that in that parking lot, and it was Elmer, I believe, that helped us get away. And as I say, I was 20 and 20 and 3 months, and she was 18 the day we were married. So we weren't all that sharp. We thought we were sharp. So we drove up to Excelsior Springs, and we had been delayed. Really, it was pretty late. We got up there around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And there's a portico, sort of a porte-cochere, I guess they call it, out in front of the Elms at that time. And I pulled up, and as I was pulling up to it, I said, Dodie, aren't you hungry? I'm really hungry. I couldn't eat dinner this evening. And she said, I'm hungry. I said, why don't I sign in and we'll send the stuff up the room and we'll go out and get a hamburger. She said, that'd be great. So I pulled up under the portico, and a couple of lively bellboys come running out. And I'm afraid that I said something like, would you fellas mind getting the stuff out of the trunk? I'll go in and register, then we're going to go out and get something to eat. Quote, get the stuff out of the trunk. You know, end quote. I registered. While I was registering, they opened the trunk and I didn't see what happened. Dodie was in the car. We went someplace and found a burger and ate it, and then came home to our honeymoon bedroom. And lo and behold, there on the bed was everything that was in the trunk of my car. The jack handle, the tool kit with the pliers laid out, the screwdriver laid out, and all this. And the spare tire, wheel and all, were lying on the bed. All of this stuff was lying on the bed. Dodie was humiliated beyond description. I was so mad I could have bitten nails. And I have to acknowledge that even then I recognized it was my own damn fault, because I'm sure I ding-a-linged him and said something like, here, get stuff out of the trunk. big man. Anyway, that's the first half of our honeymoon story. The second half is a pay cut. I had dropped out of school to run the restaurant, the Red Roost, and then sold it and gone to work in the spring of 41 when Dodie and I were engaged. I went to work for the mill because I was now a man and really had my responsibilities. We drove to Chicago, and a professor of mine from the University of Kansas City, a very wonderful guy named Rollo Funk, F-U-N-K, who was my statistics teacher, and he's also an accounting teacher, had gotten on the staff of the University of Chicago, and when he got the invitation to our wedding, he contacted me, and I had written a note to him that we were going to go to Chicago on our honeymoon, would like to see him. And he said, let me fix you up with some free space up here in Chicago, and I did. He fixed us up at the one of the housing facilities for students and student teachers at the University of Chicago. Well, this saved us a hell of a lot of money, and that's what Dodie and I did. Although I did take her to the Palmer House on our first night in Chicago, and she lost a diamond out of her wedding ring that very same night. That was another story, a horrible story. But we're staying at the University of Chicago and saving money and had a very mild time. Drove back to Kansas City, and I reported to work, and my first paycheck, I was making $32.50 a week. That was my getting married salary. And my first paycheck was $27.50. I went to Les Metzner, my cousin who was our accountant. I said, Les, you made a mistake on my paycheck. And he said, no mistake, you got to see GW. Well, that's what they called my dad, George Washington, GW. So I went into Dad, knocked on the door, and he let me in, or nodded to let me in. I said, Dad, my paycheck's $5 short. It's only $27.50, and Les says it's not a mistake. I'm supposed to see you. To which Dad replied, well, that's correct, David. You don't know the value of a dollar going off to Chicago on a honeymoon. And that's the way it was. I don't remember how long it took to get back up, but probably no more than one more paycheck at $27.50. And please don't misunderstand, my father was a great guy. He was a wonderful man. But he came from such an impoverished background. And he had struggled so hard to educate himself because he had only had like a 6th grade education down in the country school, one-room schoolhouse. And he was really trying to teach me a very important lesson, despite the fact that we were in no way reckless or careless in making that honeymoon trip. But that's what happened in 1941. The name of this one is Lloyd's Tennis Shoes. The name of this one is Lloyd's Tennis Shoes. Lloyd's Tennis Shoes. Brother Lloyd, in our childhood, was a very, very good boy. And he was just about a perfect kid, and he rarely got into trouble. But one time he did get into trouble, and it's just one of the funniest things I think that ever you can imagine. Lousy break. Kids like me got away with all kinds of things, but a guy like Lloyd, he'd pull one thing a little bit offline and he'd get caught. We're talking, let's see, Lloyd was born in 1918, and we're talking about like 5th grade, 6th grade, so he would be 10 years, it's about 1928, and he'd be about 10 years old, maybe 8 or 9. And in 26 or 28. So I was a very little boy then. I was 5 or 6 or 7. Lloyd was not permitted to wear tennis shoes to school. He had to wear dress leather shoes. Mother was very strict about our clothing. And we wore +4s or +6s or +8s. Those are knickers with big blouses at the knee, long stockings, usually plaid, and leather shoes. Actually, we were very lucky to have clothes like that because there are a lot of kids that we went to school with that didn't have that kind of clothes. Nevertheless, Lloyd wanted to wear tennis shoes like a lot of the other guys because they ran races. They had a track team in the grade school in the 2nd floor hall. They rolled up big gym mats at each end to turn around on, and we'd have track meets up there in the 2nd floor hall. And he wanted to wear his tennis shoes for that. Mother told him no. So he snuck them. He sneaked them out, left the house on Valentine, went down those wonderful stone steps into the park, winding down through the woods into the park, walked across Roanoke Park almost all the way, and took his leather shoes off and stuffed them up the flue of one of those big rock barbecue ovens the city builds in the parks. There were 2 or 3 of them down there in Roanoke Park. And put on his tennis shoes, climbed up the other side of the hill, and went to school. When he came out to go home, he dropped down into the park, went over to the oven, and sure enough, even this late in the fall, somebody had had a picnic and had had a fire. And his shoes, his leather shoes, were burned to a cinder. I feel so sorry for him. And he caught hell. That's the story about Lloyd's shoes. The name of this episode is Happy's Toe Strings. Happy's Toe Strings. As I've mentioned several times before, we were really into tennis when we were kids. Pardon me. I'll start over. As I've already said, we were really into tennis when we were kids. And when I got over to Westport Senior High School, my partner, Happy Hartfelder from Roanoke Park, and I did win the city championship in our sophomore year and our senior year. We got whipped in our junior year. But this is a story about Happy when we were a little younger than high school. And I have to tell you first about Happy. He lived just 1 block from the tennis courts from Roanoke Park, and just about 5 minutes away from where I lived on Valentine Road. But he was in a different kind of neighborhood, and his daddy had immigrated. His daddy and mother had immigrated from Germany, and he'd had some terrible luck. He was a butcher, and he was robbed and hit over the head, and it took away all of his memory. And he had a large German family. These are tow-headed people with blue eyes, and really great people, Hartfelder. And he stayed with his wife and worked as a common laborer the rest of his life. He'd been a very productive butcher. Couldn't remember how to butcher. Didn't remember his wife, didn't remember being married to him, didn't remember his children. And as a result, they were very poor. There were 8 or 9 of them living in this one house on Terrace, about just north of 39th and Terrace. And the point of all of that is that they were so poor that they only had 1 alarm clock. And several of the children had jobs, so they needed the alarm clock to wake them up for jobs. Well, Happy and I would go down at 5:45 to the tennis courts and practice, because the big kids wouldn't kick us off, like I told you before. So, since Happy couldn't get an alarm clock, and I was a little rich kid, I had a bicycle, which he didn't have, and I had an alarm clock, which he didn't have. And here we were, doubles partners, and our greatest opportunity to practice without getting kicked off by the big boys was very early in the mornings, in the summertime. So we solved that problem. I'd get up, my alarm would wake me up, I'd get dressed, my tennis clothes, get my racket and the balls, and I'd hop on my bike, and I'd ride over to Happy's house. And I'd go around the side of his house, and there'd be a string hanging down from the 2nd-story window to a rock, a small rock, on the ground. I'd pick the string up and gently tug it a couple of times, and in a few seconds, here'd come that homely little son of a bitch, Happy Hartfelder, with his blonde hair going every which direction, and his face all red, and his eyes blue and half shut. It's okay, I'll be right. So then I'd walk around the yard and kick sticks and kick rocks until he got dressed and came down, and we'd go to the courts and do our thing on the tennis court. But that's the kind of thing we did to be city champions twice. Happy Hartfelder, a great kid. And that was a wonderful family. One of his brothers became the executive vice president of a firm whose name I can't call at the moment, but they were they were out of Texas, and they were one of the very first firms to have these quick stop grocery stores, and they had them all over the South. His name is Herb Hartfelder. But that's the story of Happy Hartfelder and his toe string alarm clock. The name of this chapter is World's Fair 1933 Telegram. I was 12 in 1933, and they had a big World's Fair in Chicago. I think that Mother was sick at the time, and it's probably important to get Lloyd and me. I was 12, he was 15. Probably important to get Lloyd and me away from home for a little while, give Mother a rest. At any rate, the YMCA out in the Blue Valley district where the company business was, the mill, that YMCA had a group going to the 1933 World's Fair, and headed up by a fellow named Mr. Grace, who was going to look after the boys that went. I forget how many made the trip, but probably 20, the neighborhood of 20. At any rate, Lloyd and I did go to the World's Fair. It's very vague in my mind. I know that we stayed outside of the city in some kind of a camp with tents, like a YMCA camp. And we would fall out and muster every morning like a bunch of soldiers, and they'd check off our names and give us instructions for the day, and then we'd get into buses and we'd go to the World's Fair. Well, I was my usual foolish self. I had a total of $10 to spend on that trip. Now, that'll sound like nothing to you, but at that time, it was really very adequate. It should have lasted me, I think we were there 3 days and 3 nights, something like that. It should have lasted me for the full time, because my food was taken care of at morning and evening, not at noon, and we stayed at the camp, and so on. Anyway, The first day in to the World's Fair, Lloyd dumped me, which is perfectly excusable because 15-year-olds don't want to be jerking around with 12-year-olds. And I was alone. And I'm wandering around looking at stuff, and I've got $10 in my pocket. And I see a motorboat concession where there's a motorboat down on the water of Lake Michigan. And they've got floating platforms on both sides forming a path around a little tour. And so anyone could get in this motorboat and drive it, including me. And it cost a dime. And I thought it was fantastic. And I spent my whole $10 right there, the very first morning. By noon, I was broke. I had ridden the thing 100 times. Now I'm wandering around the concourse, and I don't have any money, and I find I have practically no money. I've got maybe 50 cents, something like that. I find an Aunt Jemima booth where they're selling Aunt Jemima pancakes and syrup, all you can eat for a dime. So I spent a dime there and ate myself almost sick because I love pancakes. I probably ate 9 or 10 of them. And then I'm wandering around the concessions in the afternoon. It's not quite time to go meet the bus. And I see a Western Union telegram booth, which is there. I didn't understand it. It's there to promote Western Union telegrams. Well, I was fascinated because in those days, it's probably very hard for you to understand this, but in those days, there was no other way to send a written message to anybody, anywhere, fast, except by Western Union. And Western Union telegrams consisted of a standard yellow piece of paper on which they glued down the strips that came off of the type machine so that the message was just stripped out in strips and glued to the sheet. Well, much to my surprise, they were giving away souvenir telegrams. You could write out any kind of a message you wanted, and they would type it out on their machine, and they'd strip those strips down on a Western Union commemorative telegram as a souvenir of the World's Fair, and they'd give it to you. It didn't cost anything. It was a promotion. I got a blank, and I addressed it to Mr. Grace in care of the YMCA in Chicago. And I said, you're hereby instructed to advance $10 to my son, David V. Selders, signed George W. Selders. And they ripped it off and they gave it to me, the souvenir. I put it in my pocket, go get on the bus, go home to the YMCA camp, eat dinner. I finally got the guts to go up to Mr. Grace's tent and slip that thing under the door. The next morning at muster, we fall out at 6 o'clock, have to be counted. The next morning at muster, after they've called all our names, we said, here, 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 here. He said, David Selders, step forward. I couldn't believe it. I don't know why. I thought it was sort of a funny joke. And I didn't dream that this YMCA director was enough of a fool to go for it. I stepped forward, and he walked over to me and he handed me a $10 bill. He said, "Your father sent us a wire telling us to give you this $10. Here you are." I said, "Thank you," and I took it, stuck it in my pocket because I didn't know what else to do. Got back in line. Lloyd is glaring at me. On the bus to the World's Fair, he's pummeling me with questions. He is mad as a hornet. He doesn't know anything about what happened, and I'm not talking. I just got the $10. I go to the World's Fair the second day, and I spent all the money on the motorboat ride. I didn't send any more telegrams. I didn't have a dime to spend the third day. I was scared to death about what my father was going to do to me. When I got home, I told him what had happened before the YMCA could contact him to collect the $10. And he almost collapsed laughing, and he didn't do one damn thing to me. That's the story of my trip to the 1933 World's Fair. It's also one reason why I've had trouble having a lot of respect for the YMCA. This is the Menorah elevator race. When Dodie and I became pregnant with George in 1951, we started building a new house over in Romanelli West because the house on Jefferson Street, 6429 Jefferson, just wasn't big enough. And we'd moved in, and it was spring, and it was time for George to be born. And this is our third child, and we were fairly calm about it. Dodie called me at the office a little afternoon and said that something was going on, and she thought maybe I better come home. So I did. And nothing, by the time I got home, nothing was happening. I've been sort of some false labor pains. Oh, I'm not. Gotta start this one over. When Dodie and I became pregnant with George in 1951, we decided we'd have to have a larger house, so we started a home, built a home over in Romanelli West, and occupied it the 2nd of January in '52, and George was expected that spring. And about the time that we were expecting George, Dodie called me at the office a little after lunch one day, and I went home promptly, and by the time I got there, the labor pains had gone away. And so, after we hung around the house for a while, I think Diane came home from school. It was around 3:30, something like that. We decided we'd go over to our favorite drive-in called Newsway, and we'd get a bite to eat or a malt or something. So we did. We took Diane and Vic and Dodie in the car, and we drove over to Newways. Just about the time, this is when you got window service at the car, curb service. Just about the time the girl brought the food, Dodie said, "Whoops, here we go." So I couldn't get the girl, and I had to jump out and just put the tray on the ground and drive away like crazy to get the kids home. I forget how we had Diane and Vic arranged for, but we did. And grabbed Dodie's bag, called Dr. Farney, took off for Menorah. And things were going pretty fast. In fact, on the way down, her water broke, so it was really, really moving fast. I didn't know Menorah. We'd never been in that hospital before. That's where Dr. Jacob Farney practiced, and he was a good friend out at Indian Hills. And that's why we went to him. We liked him. So without realizing it, I pulled around to the back entrance, which is down ground below normal, over toward the true side. Pulled off a rock hill, pulled back in there, parked, and by this time, Dodie's water had broken and she was unable to walk, unable to help her. She was bent over, doubled over. So I rushed. So I rushed into the building, which is about 50 feet away, and there was no one there. There's in a lower level. There are 2 elevators, automatic elevators, and there was no one in sight, and I yelled for help. Nobody came. I saw a wheelchair, grabbed it, ran it out to the car, got Dodie in it. It was very difficult to get her out of the car and into the wheelchair. She's still doubled over. And put the suitcase as best I could in her lap and wheeled her inside. Put the suitcase down, got the automatic elevator, rolled her onto it, turned back to get the suitcase, and as I turned back, the doors had closed. Dodie's doubled up on the elevator with nobody there. Well, this set off a crazy Laurel and Hardy pursuit on automatic elevators. It was one of the worst things I've ever been through, and I certainly can't speak for the horrible situation that Dodie was in. I don't know how many floors I stopped at and jumped out to try to find out where the other elevator was and jump back on and punch the automatic and go for it. But finally, by sheer luck, by sheer luck, I hit a floor just as the door opened, and there she was. So I hopped on with her, and I'm half crazy, and I yelled at her, and I said, "Where have you been?" But that's what I did. And she looked at me like I was crazy. Well, so then I took her off the elevator on the floor because I couldn't figure out where to go. And I found a nurse, and she said, well, you can't get to the maternity floor on this bank of elevators. You have to go around to the front of the building and catch another bank. And I said, cut me through here. So she showed me, she led the way, and we raced her through the building and around to what would be the front of the building and onto another bank of elevators. Got on that elevator, got off at the maternity floor. Jake Farney is standing there, and he says to both of us, where in the hell have you been? George was born 10 minutes later. 10 minutes from the time that we saw Jake face to face. I was sitting in a chair looking down a long aisle into the I guess you'd call it an operating room, delivery room. And I saw George hold this little baby up by his heels and work on him. He struggled a little bit with him, got him fixed up, and our George was born at 5 after 6 when Dr. Farney had met us at 5 minutes till 6. And Dodie had done very well. It was a wild, wild event. I sincerely believe that what I'm about to tell you is one of the funniest things that ever happened to anybody anywhere. And the story I'm about to tell you is about my brother Lloyd and his wife Sarah. Before I tell you the story, I want to tell you that in the beginning, I would tell this story to people in front of Lloyd because it was so hysterically funny. And he would shush me or kick my leg under the table and so on. But as time went on, so many people thought it was so incredibly funny that it became sort of an epic, and it made Lloyd sort of a hero of it. And before he died, Lloyd would prompt me in a group to tell the story. So I tell you that so that you don't think that I'm talking behind the back of my dear brother who's gone now. Okay. First of all, it helps if you know my brother Lloyd and Sarah. And if you do, you know that Lloyd is the ultimate gentleman, caring, patient, waiting, being good to Sarah, and always has been, long-suffering. Sarah, on the other hand, has her own style of doing things in her own time and her own way, which very frequently leads to causing Lloyd to have to wait on her. And finally, Lloyd's response to this was to build up a head of steam while the event was occurring, but not really doing anything about it. And then giving her a very careful reading off about the error in his view. Well, this story comes in a series, and it has to do with their wonderful Cadillac. Lloyd loved to buy used Cadillacs, and being a trader at the Board of Trade, it was a point of honor with him to buy them to advantage. And it didn't bother him that many of them were bought from women, and I won't make any comment on that, except that he was very proud of buying his Cadillacs, his used Cadillacs. And this story involves one of the best ones he ever had. He had a lovely home on 85th Street, just off of Knoll in Johnson County, Kansas. Lovely two-car garage. The doorway into the house from the garage entered onto the kitchen. Lloyd, in his customary thoughtfulness, would go out to the car when they were going to go out, and the cold weather was cold and snowy and icy and so on. And Lloyd would open the automatic garage door and start the Cadillac up, because he knew full well that Sarah would be along after a while, and there'd be time for the car to warm up. And in the first episode we're speaking of, he did this. He went out, got in the car, opened the garage door, started the engine, and sat there while it was idling. It's important for me to tell you also, in case you don't remember, that my brother Lloyd was becoming hard of hearing. He had a rather severe hearing defect. Sarah finally opened the door from the kitchen to the garage after 10 or 15 minutes of Lloyd's waiting. And without his noticing it, she automatically reached over to the wall and popped the button for the garage door, which was already open, and this closed it. But she didn't pay attention to that as she walked to the car and got in. Lloyd didn't hear it. Lloyd was furious. Sarah got in the car, put on her safety belt, and Lloyd gave her a royal chewing out for making him wait so long. And then, to punctuate his anger, he threw it in reverse and slammed through the garage door. I should say he slammed into the garage door and went as far as the trunk protruding through it, knocking it out the driveway. That was episode number 1. Episode number 2 has really escaped us as to the exact detail, but it was very similar. It was cold. Lloyd went to the car, opened the garage door by remote control, had the engine running to warm it. When Sarah finally sauntered out, he watched her like a hawk to be sure she didn't hit the wall operating button. When she got in the car, what we believe happened is that Sarah picked up the remote and punched it while Lloyd was giving her a chewing out. We're not positive. But somehow the garage door did get closed, and with Lloyd's hard of hearing and his yelling at his wife, and the doors closed in the car, neither one of them heard it. And again, to punctuate his anger, He threw it in reverse and floored it and went out back into the garage door. Well, the first time he did this, he elected not to tell the insurance company, make a claim. He did call the garage door company, and not much was said about it. The fellow said, you know, it's happened before. Well, this time Lloyd decided, no way am I going to tell the insurance company. But he did call his standard garage door company, and this is just 2 weeks later, after the repairs. And by Lloyd's own description, the repair people were looking askance at him as they were wandering around the place working. About 6 weeks has gone by. It's still winter, and it's pretty cold. The Cadillac's been fixed for the second time. The trunk was pretty badly damaged. The garage door has been fixed for the second time. They're going to go out to dinner. Lloyd goes to the car, opens the garage door, starts the engine, starts warming it up. He watches like a hawk as Sarah comes out the door finally after 15 or 20 minutes of his waiting. And she doesn't touch the wall switch. She gets in the car, closes the door, and he's giving her reading off. And what he doesn't realize is, and what Sarah doesn't realize is, that as she got in the car, she sat down on the remote control button and has closed the door while he's hollering and running the engine and is hard of hearing. And to punctuate his anger, he throws in reverse and slams into the door the third time in about 6 weeks. This time, Lloyd elected not to make an insurance claim, and he called a totally different garage door company to come fix his door. God bless you. I guess I should say, folks, that story is absolutely true. Absolutely true. The name of this story is Formal Chickens. I think some of the funniest things happened to us when we were in high school and early college. I was one of 3 spoiled brats at University of Kansas City. This is after I had not made my grades at Nebraska. I was one of 3 spoiled brats that had their own car. Roger Atzenweiler, Dick Satoris, and I. None of us could afford to operate the darn things. This is why we're going to the University of Kansas City. I'm a sophomore. This is shortly before I opened up the restaurant and got married. So it had to be in the winter of 1940. At any rate, Roger got a hold of us, Dick and I, and he said, hey, I found a great deal, Long's Poultry Shop over at 31st and Truth. Needs drivers to deliver chickens and turkeys. And they're paying a dime a piece, and you get to keep any tips. And I said, well, they pay for the gas or anything like that, give you any mileage? Well, no, it's a dime a delivery. And you get like 80 deliveries a day after school. And it's like $8. And we all thought that sounded like a pretty good deal. We figured for $1 we could fill the tank, and that'd give us $7. So we did that, and it was fairly successful. But the reason that's part of the humor of the story, I guess. Just here these guys they're driving cars that wearing out tires and wearing out engines and burning up gas, and they're getting 10 cents a delivery. And believe me, there were very few tips. Very few tips. And when there were tips, they were like nickels or dimes. But at any rate, the funniest thing that happened to me on that work, and that's why I'm telling you this story, is that I got in a squeeze one time because it was Thanksgiving party time, and I was going to be the date for a very wonderful girl named Dodie Evans. I was crazy about it. And it started early, and it was Thanksgiving time, and we had like 110 orders to deliver of turkeys and chickens. So I worked like hell, and couldn't get them all done, and ran home, drove home, bathed quickly, put on my tuxedo, went back to Long's Poultry, took one more load of turkeys and so on, and delivered those things in my tuxedo, including the last one was on the plaza, an apartment in the plaza. I'll never forget it. And this lady says, well, you surely don't need a tip. That's the end of that story. I got rid of the last turkey, and I went out and picked up the lady who's going to be my wife later on, the mother of my children. Delivering chickens in a tuxedo. It doesn't sound very funny as I'm telling you right now, but I thought it was really funny at the time. This is a story about a couple of holes in one. I don't know what year it was. It was probably about 1950 to 55. And Dodie and I were playing twilight golf at Indian Hills. And this particular night, there was a big crowd, so we went off with a few other people on the back side. As I came around to number 13, this is a hole facing the west, and the sun was setting. So it was very difficult to see at all, much less with any accuracy. And I could see a guy named Ed down on the edge of the green putting. He's a portly guy, and he's pretty easy to see. He was so round, he's round like a ball. And we were waiting for them to putt out. And it was my honor on the hole with two couples. And the men hit from a back tee, so it was my first hit. And as these people left the green and got about 3, 4, 5 yards off to the left, I teed up, and I hit about a 5-iron. I was pretty sure it was going to go on the green, but I couldn't see it at all. Could barely see the flag looking into the sun like that. But as I was trying to spot the ball, I did see this portly guy who had stopped to see how we did. That he just left the green, he stopped to see how we did. He started jumping up and down, just going crazy. And sure enough, my ball had landed just in front of that green, just over a creek, just in front of the green, bobbled up on it, and went in the hole. And I got a hole in one and got a bunch of junk and like $65, but I had to spend more than that buying drinks for everybody. That's the tradition. When you get a hole in one, you got to buy everybody in the clubhouse a drink. So I don't know how much of a loss it was. but I was very happy to have the hole in one. Now then, way before that, in 1946, I'm in Shanghai, China. And my buttonhole brother-in-law, Elmer Worcester, we were married to sisters, Dodie and A.J. Evans. Elmer Worcester's playing well, let me tell the story this way. Elmer mails to me a clipping from the Kansas City Star. He mails it to me in Shanghai. And the headline says, Worcester aces Indian Hills. And the article went on to say, Elmer Worcester ace number 3 at Indian Hills on such and such a day. Period. Worcester went on to complete the round in an even 100, it said, which I thought was pretty funny. Then, after I got home from China, after I got out of the service, and after I get a chance to talk to some of the fellows around the club, I discovered that what Elmer had done was he had shanked an iron off of the 3T, and it traveled like a whistling bullet in the air, clear over and past the green on the left side, where there are a bunch of oak trees. He hit and rattled around in those oak trees, 3 or 4 trees, the last one of which bounced the ball on the back side of the green, the back hillside, it bubbled up onto the green, rolled down, and went in the hole. And this is the one that Elmer is bragging about. While I'm in Shanghai eating my heart out, he's sending me this clipping from the Star bragging about his ace. You know, sometimes you just can't win for losing. I love that guy. Doty's 17th. Let's do it again. Doty's 17th. This is Doty's 17th. Doty's 17th. I really enjoy reliving this story. Let's see now, I got out of high school in June of '38, went to the summer school in the summer of '38 at the University of Kansas City. Went to Nebraska the fall of '38 and the spring of '39. Then I went to the University of Kansas City the fall of '39 and the spring of '40. And in the fall of '40, I was an old hand, part of the Kegon fraternity there, with a bunch of really nice guys, and Freddie Diebel was one of my buddies. And on the opening day of college in September of, actually it was September 18th of 1940, Fred and I were cruising around the campus looking at the girls because we were both totally unattached. And we walked into the main building, that wonderful old Dickey mansion is still there. And we were sitting on the floor, on the marble floor, with our backs against the wall, looking at all of the freshman girls that were lined up doing one thing or another about registration. And I saw a girl walk over to a drinking fountain right across the hall from me. And she was absolutely the most magically beautiful, lovely looking person I had ever seen. And I quickly asked Fred if he had any idea who she was. And he had heard of her and said her name was Doty Evans. And as a matter of fact, he had heard that this was her birthday. Well, that night I couldn't get Doty off my mind. I didn't speak to her that day, made no attempt to meet her. They were busy enrolling. She was with Sarah Jane Wilkerson, best pals, and who became a good friend of mine, the whole Wilkerson family later. But couldn't get her off my mind that night. And I did another one of my crazy things. I called up Western Union and I dictated a telegram to her. I found her address. Didn't know how to spell her name. I spelled it D-O-D-I-E instead of D-O-D-Y. And I said, David wishes Dodie a happy birthday. Will Dodie meet David for a Coke in the cafeteria tomorrow morning? Signed, David. Well, neither one of us knew that this would happen, but 1 year from that day that I first saw her, 1 year from the day I sent the telegram, and I still have the telegram in my life library, we were married at the Country Club Christian Church. Within 6 months from that date, we were engaged. It was the luckiest day of my life to meet that wonderful, wonderful woman. We were both too young to get married. She was 17 that day, but I did marry her 1 year later on her 18th birthday. I was 19 when I first saw her. I was 20 when I married her. But just seeing that woman that day changed my life completely. It certainly changed her life. And it brought us the lives of our dear children. And made my life really complete. Of course, I'm terribly sorry that she developed a sickness that was very difficult for all of us. But we mustn't forget it was terribly difficult for her too. And I love her today. And I always have loved her. And I hope you kids love her. Because she was a wonderful, wonderful lady. And we miss her very much. But, like the philosopher that says, you got to say the glass is half full, not half empty, I have to say thank God for the time that I did have with her when she was well. I've never met anyone her equal when she was well. And she's still the most beautiful person I've ever seen in my life. That's it.